I'm a big fan of mentorship.
Right.
I'm actually a founding mentor with an organisation called The Working Lunch, which supports underrepresented people in the games industry in Australia, which is 82% male and overwhelmingly white. So, we needed to band together and help each other. We have so much knowledge and skills between us. It's kind of like an extension of what Jordan was saying. We come together, we collaborate, and we share what we have with each other rather than succumbing to seeing each other as competition. We absolutely cannot fall into that in any way, shape or form. And I genuinely believe that we have power when we work together and we have strength in numbers and we can support each other. And we all have such vast experiences across STEM in general, not just in tech, that we can teach each other. And we've all been in situations where we can advise someone else and say, hey, I've been there. This is what you should do. This is what you shouldn't do. And that's really the only way forward that I can see. I think in a world where we are seen as scrambling for the very few jobs that exist amongst ourselves, we have to work together.
Genevieve Bell, 3 decades in Silicon Valley, heavily male-dominated environment.
Huh?
How can we as a society trust, I guess, a sector that is so dominated by one gender to carve out the way forward?
Well, I think you probably can't. I mean, I don't mean that in a kind of you should then dismiss it. I think it means you actually have to work to change it. And I think, if I look at a number of companies, both in the US and Australia in the tech sector, there's a commitment to doing things differently, and you see it in everything from how they make decisions about leadership to how they make decisions about investments to how they decide to position themselves and what they care about. But in order to make that work, I mean, Ray's exactly right. You have to have a strong culture about mentorship, you have to have a strong culture of advocacy and sponsorship, but I think you also can't keep asking women and other minorities to be better and better. You also have to ask that the men in the system make room. And so I think, one of the most interesting lessons I learnt in my time in the US was that as teams get more diverse, you have to actually think about how you handle conflict, because more people from more different places, more opinions, and not everyone kind of has the same way of thinking about things. So you have to be willing to create space for that. And I think the nicest mantra I ever heard was one of my colleagues and woman who became a friend of mine said, listen, you have to have diversity, but then you have to have inclusion, and you'll know you've succeeded when people feel like they really belong there. Mm-hmm. And so for me, that sort of troika turns out to be really important. And I think the way to think about it in terms of should we trust those companies, it's not about whether we should trust them or not, it's about what we should be asking them to do differently.
I agree with the comments that everyone else has made, but can I just say one of my finest achievements in my own mind is that we established the Greater Sydney Commission back in 2016, and over 2/3 of the leadership group is female, which is there's not many, sort of government agency type entities which have that sort of track record. But overall, it's a very gender diverse, but, highly concentrated with women completely on merit. And, having so many women working in the organisation on planning, for a better future for Greater Sydney actually gave people a really good insight. And one of our sort of core mantras was to develop a female-friendly city, and so to make it accessible and good about how you move around. And when you think about it, that has indirect flow-on effects for women in innovation. A lot of the time, innovators have to work after office hours, so they have to feel safe moving around the streets at night, when they're able to gather in restaurants and bars, etc. It's that mobility and that inclusion which is so important. So I think anybody in a leadership position has a real obligation, and I know that everybody here understands that and lives that too, to actually include women to the maximum extent possible, because I tell you what, when you do, you'll have a much more effective organisation.
But to Genevieve's point, let's put some spotlight on a male in the sector, Alan Finkel. Don't you actually have to do more as a male, as a leading male voice in a sector like this? If we're going to be so reliant on science and technology and research and development on the other side of this pandemic, to make sure that it reflects our society more broadly?
Absolutely, and we've already heard about the important role of mentorship, but also leadership. I'm a member of the Male Champions of Change for STEM, which is male CEOs who are taking strategic approaches to being inclusive at work. And don't forget also the extraordinary importance of that agent for social change over decades, in fact over centuries, which is the university system. And the university system in Australia has signed up to a program called SAGE, where pretty much all the universities commit themselves to a plan for equity, for inclusiveness, to give opportunities to women at every single level in the university. Because one of the challenges that we face, of course, is drop-off of women as you go up through the management ranks. That program called SAGE is making a difference. It takes time, but as SAGE rolls out, we will see more and more social impact led by the universities.